Numbers don't lie, people do, but the numbers underneath them never do. Rue Danner had known that since she was 11 years old, sitting at a water-damaged kitchen table in a Memphis walk-up, watching her mother's utility bills pile up in ways that didn't match the income her mother claimed to bring home. Even then, before she had a name for what she was doing, she could feel the wrongness in misaligned columns, the way other people felt a splinter. Not visible, but impossible to stop pressing. 2 years inside the Falcone Group had given her an entirely new catalogue of splinters. The charity gala was held in the Grand Meridian Hotel's top-floor ballroom, a place where old money and laundered money wore the same tuxedos and shook the same hands. The Falcone Group had sponsored 3 tables. Rue attended because her direct supervisor had developed food poisoning that afternoon and shoved the invitation packet across his desk at her with the instruction to smile and look like she belonged. She didn't. The emerald dress she'd borrowed from her neighbor was half a size too small across the shoulders, and her heels were cheap enough that the carpet swallowed the sound of her steps, which turned out to be the only lucky thing about the evening. The trouble started at 10:47 p.m. She had slipped away from the table to check a wire transfer confirmation she'd been waiting on all week. The kind that couldn't wait, because in her experience, the numbers that looked fine on the surface were always the ones with something buried 3 layers down. She found a dim alcove near the service corridor, pulled out her phone, and that was when the door beside her creaked open. 2 men came through. The conversation they were having stopped the moment they registered her presence. The wider of the 2, a man with a jaw like a cinder block and eyes that didn't waste time on pleasantries, looked at the lanyard around her neck. Gold lettering, Falcone Group against her sternum. He said nothing, he simply nodded to the second man. Before Rue could process what was happening, they had her by the arm and were moving her through the service door and down a maintenance stairwell that smelled of industrial cleaner and old metal. The parking sublevel was cold, concrete and flickering fluorescent and the distant hum of the hotel's ventilation system. They put her in a room the size of a generous closet, electrical panels along one wall, steel shelving along the other, a tinsel overhead bulb that buzzed like a trapped insect. "We'll be back," the wide-shouldered man said. He didn't threaten her, he didn't need to. The door locked from the outside. Rue stood in the humming silence for exactly 3 seconds. Then she sat down on the concrete floor, back against the shelving unit, and did the thing she always did when the world became too large and too loud. She made herself small, she breathed, she counted. 1, 2, 3. Her phone had 2 bars of service that kept blinking on and off. She had the police, who in this part of the city took 40 minutes minimum. She had her sister in Phoenix, who would cry and book a flight and arrive in 3 days. She had the firm's emergency legal line, which she had personally verified routed to a voicemail box that no one monitored after 6 p.m., because she had called it once during a software crash at 9 on a Tuesday and been met with silence. And she had the number she was never supposed to use outside of a direct audit emergency, a direct line, saved exactly as instructed. 1 word, no title, no last name. Falcone. She pressed call before she could construct a reason not to. It rang twice. Across the city, in the private back room of a steakhouse that had been closed to the public for the past 3 hours, Falcone sat at a table set for 2. The second chair was occupied by a man named Gettis, who ran Eastern port operations and who had been insisting for the better part of 40 minutes that he had no knowledge of a skimmed container shipment worth $4.7 million. Gettis was now significantly less insistent. Falcone's phone vibrated in his breast pocket. He ignored it. He ignored it a second time. On the 3rd vibration, sustained, not a message, he held up 1 finger to Gettis without looking at him and withdrew the phone. He looked at the screen. The name registered in the same way that something cold and wrong registers, quietly, completely, all at once. He answered. Talk. A pause. Static. Then her voice, low, controlled, but with something underneath it she was clearly working very hard to keep contained. "This is Rue Danner. From auditing, I'm sorry to use this line. I know it's not for." She stopped, restarted. "I'm in the parking sub-level of the Grand Meridian, maintenance electrical room. 2 men brought me here. They saw the company lanyard." Falcone stood. The chair behind him scraped against the hardwood. His enforcer, Lars, who had been standing at the far wall with the particular stillness of someone paid to be invisible, straightened immediately. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Do you know who the men work for?" A brief silence. He could hear her breathing, measured, deliberate, the sound of someone actively managing her own pulse. "I don't know names, but the one who spoke, he had a tattoo on his right hand. An 8-pointed star, faded, old ink. The mark of the Verone outfit. Rivals who had been probing his East Side operations for 3 months, looking for a soft point of entry. His forensic auditor, who had reorganized 4 years of chaotic financial records into something a federal judge couldn't touch, who had flagged 3 phantom invoices before the internal review even opened the file, who treated the complicated arithmetic of his empire with the same clinical precision she would apply to anyone's books. She'd been seen at a Falcone Group table. To the Verone men, she was leverage, a handle. "How long since they left?" he asked, already moving toward the door. "Maybe 5 minutes." "Don't call anyone else. Don't open that door. Stay on the line." He pushed through into the alley behind the steakhouse. The night air was cold and wet. "I'm 20 minutes away." "Okay." A pause, then, barely above a whisper, in a register entirely different from the controlled voice she'd been using, "Please be closer than that." The fracture was small. She was already plastering over it before the words finished landing. But he heard it, and something in his chest responded to it in a way he didn't examine. "I'll be closer," he said. Lars drove. Falcone sat in the passenger seat with the phone loosely in his hand, the line open, saying nothing. She said nothing either. There was nothing useful to say, and Rue Danner, he was rapidly understanding, did not fill silence with noise. He knew her as a line item in a department report, a commendation from accounts, an unusually precise quarterly variance analysis that had landed on his desk with 3 paragraphs and a bottom line underlined in yellow, no flourish, no hedge. Just the point. He'd noted the name. He hadn't thought about what the name belonged to. He was thinking about it now. "They're back," she said. "Still even, still controlled. I can hear them outside." "Don't move, don't speak," he looked at Lars. "How far?" 4 minutes. Then, through the phone, the sound of a lock disengaging. She didn't scream. He heard the small, sharp breath she took instead, the sound of someone pressing their own terror down flat so it doesn't make any noise. "Rue," his voice dropped. "I'm at the building." Lars jumped the curb outside the hotel's service entrance. Falcone was out of the car before it stopped. He went through the service entrance, a credentials card that didn't officially exist, held to the reader for the 3 seconds it took the latch to release. The stairwell was where the building layout said it would be. He'd stayed in 3 properties in this hotel chain. They all ran the same blueprint. He heard the voices before he reached the sublevel. 2 men in the corridor. The electrical room door was open. Pale light on concrete. Falcone came around the corner at walking pace. No announcement. He simply appeared. The wide-shouldered man registered the face first. Recognition landed on him the way it always landed on people who understood exactly what recognizing Falcone meant. Like cold water, all at once, nothing to grab onto. "Mr. Fal." "Don't." Falcone's voice was conversational. "She's leaving with me. The only question you need to answer is whether you're leaving this garage on your feet or in pieces." The second man's hand moved toward his jacket. Lars stepped out of the shadow behind Falcone, and the hand stopped. 3 seconds of very particular silence. The wide-shouldered man stepped back, hands slightly open at his sides, not surrendered but readable. A man running the arithmetic on what this cost against what would cost to push further. He chose correctly. Falcone walked past him into the electrical room. She was standing against the shelving unit, still in the emerald dress, shoes still on, one arm wrapped around her own midsection in the posture of someone who had been holding themselves together for the better part of an hour on sheer willpower and was now in the final reserve. Her phone was in her other hand. She looked at him, dark eyes behind dark-framed glasses, slightly smudged at the corners, expression unreadable for one long second, and then that arm tightened around herself, just slightly, as though she had to physically reinforce the seam. "You weren't 20 minutes away," she said. "No." She nodded once. She looked at the open door, at the empty corridor. "They're gone?" "They're not a problem." She pushed herself off the shelving unit and walked toward the door. Her steps were completely steady. She didn't shake. She didn't cry. She walked past him and into the corridor, and when she found the elevator without being directed, he realized she had already mapped the route. She was 3 steps ahead of her own fear before it could catch up. He followed. Lars drove. The city moved past the windows in long, bleeding streaks of streetlight. Rue sat with her knees together and her hands flat on her thighs, staring at some middle distance that had nothing to do with the view outside. "Where am I taking you?" Lars asked. "Home," Rue said, and gave an address on the west side. "You're not going home tonight," Falcone said. She turned and looked at him. It was a direct look, the kind that didn't build up to itself, didn't announce itself. It just arrived. He'd seen men who had worked for him for a decade fail to look at him with that degree of directness. "I have a 7 a.m. meeting," she said. "The men who took you know your name and your association with the firm. Your address is in the HR system." A beat. "Which is compromised," she said, "not a question." "Assume it is." She was quiet. He watched her work through the calculation, the slight shift in her jaw, the small adjustment in her posture that meant she had reached a conclusion she didn't like, but could accept. "All right," she said, that was all. His penthouse was in the financial district. The elevator opened directly into the foyer, and Rue stepped out and stood in the open-plan space and looked around with the methodical attention of someone taking inventory. She noted the exits. She noted the windows. She noted the absence of anything personal on the walls. No photographs, no art, nothing that acknowledged a life being lived here as opposed to stored. He let her look. "Guest room is the second door on the left," he said. "En suite. Lars will arrange clothes in the morning." She turned and looked at him. Her glasses were still smudged. The dress had a small pull at the left shoulder seam from being the wrong size, something she'd been quietly managing all night. "You should have someone look at that," she said. He followed her gaze. He'd taken an elbow from the wide-shouldered man in the corridor, enough to leave a mark along his jaw she'd apparently been tracking. "I'm fine." "I'm not asking if you're fine. I'm saying someone should look at it." She crossed to the kitchen and opened the cabinet under the sink without hesitating, the place where a person organized toward utility would logically keep supplies. She was right. First aid kit, Lars's work, in every property. She pulled it out and set it on the counter. She looked at him and waited. He walked to the kitchen. He sat on one of the counter stools without entirely understanding why. Rue opened the kit, unfolded gauze, and began. Her hands were steady. She worked close enough that he could see the faint shadows under her eyes, the mascara that had migrated to the wrong places, 3 faint freckles along her left cheekbone. She'd done nothing to conceal or highlight. "You shouldn't have called me," he said, not unkindly, as a statement of record. "You were the only number that made sense," she said. She pressed gauze lightly to the mark on his jaw. "The police take 40 minutes in that district. My sister would have cried and been useless. And the firm's emergency line goes to a voicemail box nobody monitors." "How do you know that?" "Because I tested it at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday during a software crash, and no one answered." She pulled the gauze away, examined it, refolded it. "I figured if that wasn't an emergency worth responding to, being grabbed in a parking garage probably wasn't either." He looked at her. She was focused on his jaw with the same precision she applied to a 1,200-page audit. No decoration, no excess, just the thing that needed doing, done correctly. "I'm sorry," he said, "that you were there tonight." She was quiet for a moment. "Is it going to happen again?" "No." "Because you'll handle it, or because you'll move me somewhere they can't reach?" "Both." She finished, capped the kit, set it aside. Then she leaned against the counter with her arms loosely crossed and regarded him with that same flat, clear attention he was starting to recognize as simply how she looked at things she needed to understand. "I've been auditing your books for 2 years, she said. "Yes. The numbers are complicated." He held her gaze. "They are." "I never asked about the complications." "No." A beat. He waited. "I'm asking now," Rue said. He told her enough. Not everything. Nobody received everything, not even Lars. But enough that when she nodded, slowly, at the end of it, she was nodding at something real. "Okay," she said. The same word she'd used in the car, small and final and containing something larger underneath it. By morning, 2 lieutenants were in the living room with their jackets over the chair backs and their phones face down, and the expressions of men who had been there most of the night and were beginning to feel it in their bones. Rue walked out of the guest room, wearing a pair of his sweatpants rolled 4 times at the waist, and an old grey Henley that reached her mid-thigh. She had her glasses on. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like someone who had metabolized the previous night and was now prepared to function. She looked at the men. The men looked at her. She looked at the maps spread across the dining table, marked points, red circles, handwritten notations. She stood there for a moment, reading them in silence. "You're watching the wrong facility," she said. Falcone looked up from the far end of the table. One of his lieutenants, a compact, careful man named Stead, started to speak. Rue talked evenly over him. "This location here," she pointed at the map without touching it. "You've marked it secondary. But if you look at the Verone payment routing over the last quarter," she picked up her phone, pulled up a document, laid it flat so the table could see the screen. "They transferred significant funds to a Delaware logistics shell 3 weeks ago. The shell's registered agent address is 4 blocks from this facility. That's not a secondary staging point. That's the primary cash movement node." The room was quiet. Falcone walked to the table. He stood beside her, not behind her, not over her, and looked at the screen. "How do you have this?" "I built a financial mirror of their holding accounts 6 months ago, when your litigation team subpoenaed their shipping manifests. I kept the model updated." She picked up the phone. "I thought it was accounting practice. It turns out it's a full map of their cash infrastructure." She looked at him sideways. "Do you want it?" He looked at her for a moment. The room was very still. "Stead," he said, without moving his eyes from her face. "Clear the morning." "Yes, sir." On the 3rd day, Rue announced from behind her screen that she had frozen 4 Verone accounts simultaneously by filing fictitious compliance flags through channels that looked entirely routine from the outside. On the 4th day, she rerouted a scheduled payment to their East Side crew through a review loop she had personally constructed, a loop that would take 6 weeks to clear if left alone, which she did not intend to leave alone. "They'll miss payroll by Friday," she said on the 4th morning, not looking up. Falcone set a coffee beside her keyboard. "Which crew?" "Both of them. I collapsed the Cayman routing." She highlighted a column. "Everything sitting in escrow pending a compliance review that doesn't exist." She finally looked up. "Unpaid men don't fight. They calculate. They panic," he said. "That's the point." He looked at her, really looked, the way he had not permitted himself to in the first 48 hours, when he had been maintaining a careful professional distance between what was useful and what was something else entirely. She had shadows under her eyes and a coffee stain on the Henley she hadn't had time to care about. She looked like a person running on fumes from a tank that had started nearly empty. She also looked more at home in the middle of a crisis than anyone he had ever worked with. Rue. She was already back at the screen. Rue. He put his hand on the laptop lid gently. She stopped, looked up. When this is over, he said, you have a choice to make. She waited. No performance, no bracing, just that clear level attention. You can take a settlement and walk. Everything sealed, clean references, more money than a decade of audit work. You never think about this again, he paused. Or you stay. As an auditor, she said carefully. As more than that. Something shifted behind her eyes, the way a number shifts when you find the hidden line that explains the entire spreadsheet, and the whole thing resolves. You would have been looking a lot longer, she said after a moment, if I'd known what I was walking into when I took the job. Yes. I would have run. Yes. She looked at her hands on the keyboard. I didn't run. No, he said, you didn't. The Verone outfit went quiet on day 5, not with a formal communication, with the absence of one. The probes stopped. The pressure on the east side stopped. A mutual contact reached out to Lars with terms of disengagement, territorial acknowledgement, no further contact. Falcone told her that evening. She was standing at the windows with her coffee, watching the city below in the particular way. She watched things she was trying to fully understand, rather than simply observe. She'd showered. She was wearing actual clothes Lars had finally sourced, dark trousers, a clean shirt, both fitting correctly, which seemed to restore some essential alignment to her posture. It's over, she asked. It's over. She turned from the window. The length of the room was between them. It was large and very small at the same time. I'd like to stay, she said. Not in the guest room, I mean at the firm. The pause before the next words was the smallest he had ever seen her allow, and whatever else you were describing. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her close enough that she had to look up slightly. You understand what it means, he said, what this is. I've been auditing it for 2 years, she said. I understand exactly what it is. He kissed her, not as a question. She kissed him back with one hand pressing flat against his chest, not pushing away but anchoring, the way she anchored every figure to the page, making it real, making it stay. When they broke apart, she left her hand where it was. She could feel his heartbeat through the fabric, fast and entirely human, and at complete odds with every cold surface of everything else about him. You're going to be a problem, he said. I've been a problem since the first quarterly review, she replied. You kept me anyway. 6 months later, the Falcone Group's new offices occupied 2 floors of a glass tower in the financial district. Legitimate contracts, clean invoices, financials that could withstand any audit because Rue had built them that way, from the foundation up. Her name was on the door of the upper floor office in the same lettering as his. On a Tuesday afternoon, rain on the glass and the city below conducting its usual complicated business, Rue walked into Falcone's office without knocking. She had never knocked, not in 2 years, not once, and set a single sheet of paper on his desk. Port Authority approved the northern expansion, she said. The union pension structure signs tomorrow, and I found a $2 million discrepancy in the Holt Group's compliance filing. She picked up her coffee. They'll be calling to negotiate by Thursday. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. He leaned back in his chair with the particular expression he reserved for rooms where no one else was watching. The one that said, without saying anything, that the world had become briefly more workable than it had any right to be. You could have sent an email, he said. I could have, she agreed. She walked around the desk, and he caught her wrist gently and drew her into the chair beside him, not behind the desk, beside it, where she had always been, even before either of them had a name for it. Outside, the city ran its complications. Inside the office, every column balanced, every line. The woman who had been invisible in the ledger had written herself into it permanently, in ink that didn't wash out, in numbers that never lied.